And late last week, our next guest convened a bipartisan meeting of governors, senators, and members of the House Problem Solvers Caucus to talk infrastructure. I want to welcome Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland. Are you willing to think these issues should be broken apart?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this was somewhat unprecedented that we had governors from both parties, senators and congressmen, Democrats and Republicans, gathered for 2 days to talk about really agreeing on a bipartisan consensus on infrastructure. So I think everybody that attended the summit agrees with Senator Manchin. And look, we all rebuilding America's infrastructure is a critical issue that we all agree on, and we all think it should be a bipartisan effort that has the support of Republicans and Democrats, and that it should be focused on infrastructure, not just roads and bridges and tunnels that are crumbling and airports and ports, but also digital infrastructure and green energy and the grid. We can agree on finding that middle ground. But the second set of things that the president is apparently going to unveil for the first time on Wednesday is really has nothing to do with infrastructure, and most of us think it should be handled separately.
How do you think we should pay for all of this? We've been having big debates since last week when it was unveiled effectively that there's going to be an additional higher tax on capital gains for those making over $1 million. Is that the right way to do it?
Well, so first of all, we've got to agree on the scope of what's going to be included in the bill and figure out the cost. They're pretty far apart. I mean, it's $1.6 trillion difference between what the Republicans have proposed and what the Democrats have proposed. So we need to right-size the proposal and define infrastructure, figure out what that cost is, and then come up with the pay-fors. And that's really the main sticking point. I mean, we've reached a tremendous amount of agreement between Democrats and Republicans on the first several parts of the issue, but how we're going to pay for it is still the one that's going to require quite a bit of back and forth in the House and the Senate over the next weeks and potentially months.
Let me throw another monkey wrench into the pay-fors. The SALT tax. We've heard from people like Senator Schumer and others who effectively say when it comes to all of these things, they desperately want to fix the SALT tax issue and reverse it back to what it used to be. Do you think that's in the cards or not really?
You know, I think, it's hard to tell exactly what's going to come out of this Congress. I think the first thing we have to figure out is how much we're going to spend and where the money's going to come from. We can't start figuring out what taxes we're going to raise before we figure out what money we actually need to spend to rebuild infrastructure, which I think most people would agree we've got to try to address. But you're going to find great differences between Democrats and Republicans. First of all, on how big it should be, but even more disagreement probably on how we're going to come up with the money.
In terms of the total number, if you're a betting man on infrastructure, to the extent we get there, what do you think the number actually lands at? What does it look like?
Well, it would be just a guess and just my, not speaking for the whole group. But I think the Republicans are at $600 billion and the Democrats are at $2.3 trillion. I think if you broadly define infrastructure, you get somewhere between, 900 billion to maybe 1.1 trillion. So somewhere in there, maybe about half the size of the package. I mean, some people are saying only about 200 million of it is actually roads and bridges. But anything that we talk about building, repairing, either physically or digitally, you could stretch it to about half of what the package is. But the other stuff really has nothing to do with infrastructure.
But let me ask you, because we keep going back to the pay-fors, do you believe that the Biden administration's tax plan is simply about pay-fors, meaning paying for the new infrastructure plan, for example, or is it about bringing in even more revenue than that to try to deal with our previous debts and other things? So are we going to be having, this costs this and this costs that, therefore we need to make up that money? Or do you think it's actually a very different discussion that also includes inequality and trying to, frankly, I think there's some people out there who are watching us this morning who think that part of the tax policy is to actually literally bring down the top?
Well, I think that excellent point, and I think that's what the Biden administration and the Democratic leadership is talking about. It's not what the Republicans and or these bipartisan kind of centrist Democrats. We had Joe Manchin was with us Thursday and Friday of last week. There are about 10 Democrats and 10 Republican senators who work together. They call themselves the G20. I'm the chairman of No Labels. We have the Problem Solvers Caucus. It's 58 House members, 29 Democrats. None of them are talking about that. What they're talking about is just focused on actual infrastructure and how we find a way to find that common ground to pay for it. But there's no question that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and the Biden administration has a completely different perspective, and that's where all of the talk's going to be. But one of the things that we talked a lot about. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Governor, I don't know whether it's going to pay down other debt. There's a whole contingent of people that say it's not going to do any of that. It's actually punitive. And it's not about redistribution where you take it away from one person to do some good stuff for another person. It's just simply, and I'm talking about a piece by Lawrence Lindsay, an opinion piece, obviously, in the Journal today. He wants to raise the rate on capital gains so high that everyone would be worse off, and it's really just done to punish the people that have done well, and it's going to actually lose revenue overall. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that, and I think that's one of the main reasons why we should separate out all of this other, family infrastructure they're talking about, and all these massive tax hikes on the rich and on corporations, and set that aside for a later debate while we focus on infrastructure, which is something that Republicans and Democrats do agree on, and where we can find common ground and get it done. The other thing is there's trillions of dollars of private sector capital willing to invest in infrastructure. So it's not just about taxing folks. In our state of Maryland, we're building the largest P3 transit system in North America and the largest P3 highway system in the world with private sector dollars invested. So, it's not all about, just taxing folks, raising the capital gains tax and taxing the rich. But, our state of Maryland made that mistake before I became governor. We taxed everybody at a higher rate, and they all stopped paying taxes in Maryland. Some of them moved out of the state.
Okay. Governor, we appreciate you being with us this morning. We hope to see you again very soon as we follow the progress of this infrastructure plan. As you can see, the tax debate will continue. Becky?